Upon hearing the man's words, Jiang began to stare into his eyes and soon realized what was about to happen. His suspicions were correct. The man attempted to strike him with all his strength, but to his misfortune, Jiang had already anticipated it. He simply gathered momentum and leaped to the side, evading the attack, causing the man's fist to impact against the ground, shattering it into pieces. While Jiang was in the air and moving away from the man, he put his hand in front of his face and with an aggressive look, began to stare at the man and wonder what the Zhao family was. Seeing the man's attitude, Jiang realized that he wasn't normal. The man was very angry. He clenched his teeth tightly and while staring at Jiang with a murderous look, he began to approach him at high speed. He unsheathed his sword and couldn't help but praise him for being quite fast. Upon seeing that things had reached this point, Jiang removed his hood and extended his hand to the side, causing Little Nine's poisonous mist to appear. He began staring at the man intently and told Little Nine that it was no longer necessary to hold back. Upon hearing this, she manifested herself through the poisonous mist and while staring at the man with a murderous look, responded with an understood. Upon seeing the poisonous mist, the man became even more aggressive. He started shouting and asking Jiang if he really believed he would scare him again with the same trick. Just before Jiang could teach this bastard a good lesson, someone appeared and addressed the man as Zheng Tai, reminding him once again that they had to act discreetly. Upon hearing the voice, Zheng Tai's expression changed drastically. He clenched his teeth tightly and as he slowly turned his head back, he couldn't help but feel afraid. Jiang simply stood silently observing and began to wonder what was happening. A man with blue hair wearing a hood appeared behind Zheng Tai. He was quite angry. He started staring at him with a murderous look and asked him what he was doing here, when he had asked him to search for someone. Zheng Tai was scared shitless. He clenched his teeth tightly, and as he slowly turned his head back, he began to tremble and tried to give an explanation. But just before he could speak, the man interrupted him, turned around, slightly turned his head towards him, and with a disappointing look called him trash that only caused problems. Upon hearing this, poor Zheng Tai became even more scared shitless, and just before he could utter a word, the man delivered a strong punch under his chin, causing him to start bleeding from his nose. This man was part of the Zhao family. While his body emitted a powerful energy, he turned his head towards Zheng Tai and with a murderous look reminded him once again that he was nothing but a dog of the Zhao family who had no right to use the name of the Zhao family. Immediately, Zheng Tai fell to his knees on the ground, bowed his head before him, and apologized, explaining that he would not forget it in the future. Now that there was going to be no action, Jiang put his hood back on, turned his head towards them, and silently observed them. Incredibly, he had not sensed the presence of the man. It didn't take long for him to realize that this guy was more dangerous than the previous warrior. While Zheng Tai was getting up, the man began to approach Jiang and apologized, explaining that his dog tended to bite things. He was willing to compensate the protagonist for this. Jiang simply asked him not to worry as it wasn't necessary. Upon hearing this, the man approached him and with a smile asked if he was going to go to the desert. The man approached him and while his body was emanating a powerful energy, he began to stare into his eyes and asked if he wanted to go to the desert together. Jiang simply started staring into his eyes and remained silent for several seconds. Then he turned his back on them and as he slowly distanced himself from them, he refused to go with him as he preferred to go alone. Upon hearing this, the man simply watched as Jiang walked away and remained silent. He thought that he was quite an interesting person. He knew that Jiang had awakened the divine class of creation called Spiritual Master. Once Jiang had distanced himself enough from them, Zheng Tai stood up, approached the man, and asked him if he should continue searching for the person he had been entrusted with. The man slightly turned his head towards him and while looking into his eyes, he replied that no, because by the time he finished, it would already be too late. Besides, he had already found the clues. The girl they were looking for had escaped from the city and probably wanted to cross the desert to reach the nearest station. He took off his hood using his hand and as he was moving away from Zheng Tai, he asked him not to allow her to arrive alive at the inn, giving him the order to call back all scattered servants and come with him to the desert. Zheng Tai placed both hands on his chest, lowered his head, closed his eyes, and responded with a understood. Humans had spread widely across this planet and had built countless cities. However, with the arrival of the awakened era, waves of beasts, secret realms, and dungeons invading human homes led to the constant remodeling of ancient human dwellings with great power. Nowadays, only the awakened ones who sought power would return to these places to fight against monsters, level up, and obtain wealth. Now these places are known as wild lands. rats. Jiang began to advance through the area, and along the way he came across a bunch of rats. Several hours later, Jiang arrived at a remote and destroyed part of the city. While he was walking, he started to feel as if he had gotten lost. He was heading towards the goblin beast's nest, and he had been walking for several hours already. It was already nighttime and he still hadn't arrived. Little Nine was hungry, so she hunted a rat, climbed onto Jiang's head, and while holding it in her mouth, she realized that it didn't taste good. She came to the conclusion that she couldn't eat just anything. Along the way, Jiang had seen many monsters, but now that he had reached this area, he couldn't even spot a strong monster. These monsters granted a very low devouring value if Jiang didn't find a beast boss nest, considering the time it would take him to return. He couldn't waste much time as it could delay his entry into the night watch. While Jiang was walking, he began to look ahead with a serious gaze and became lost in his thoughts. Just then, the sky started filling up with dark clouds until several seconds later, it started raining. At that moment, a giant spider lurking in the area noticed Jiang's presence, and as it slowly descended towards him, it began to stare at him with a murderous gaze. Jiang reached out his hand to the side, and as raindrops fell onto his hand, he realized that this rain was a magical fluctuation, which meant he had entered an area where some beast lairs were located. He couldn't help but feel joy because even though they had made a mistake in searching for the beast's nest, luckily they had found it. Now the only thing left was to quickly find the monster in order to completely fill the devouring bar for the first time. Several seconds later, Jiang turned his head back and saw the monster slowly approaching him. Both started to stare into each other's eyes and remained silent for several seconds. Little Nine manifested, and while she was staring intently at the monster, she asked Jiang if he wanted her to intervene. Jiang slightly raised his head, and while looking at the monster, he replied to her that it was not necessary since the level of this monster was not high and it only seemed to have a slightly larger body size than the other monsters. Taking advantage of this, the monster descended to the ground and began preparing its sharp legs to attack him. With a killer look, the monster began to attack Jiang using its sharp legs, but without much effort. He gained momentum and started dodging the attacks with small jumps as if nothing. Then, taking advantage of the moment, he gathered strength and took a big leap. In the blink of an eye, he appeared on top of the monster, clenched his fist tightly, and prepared to strike. The monster lifted its head and, upon seeing Jiang, became terrified and started wondering what was happening. Jiang struck the monster forcefully, causing its body to hit the ground, ending its life and destroying the floor into pieces. While Jiang was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine appeared. She placed her hand on her forehead and informed him that more monsters had appeared. Upon hearing her voice, he snapped out of his trance, turned his head to the side, and was surprised. The sound of his strike had caught the attention of all the other monsters hiding in the area. While Jiang was standing on top of the monster's corpse, the giant spiders began to approach him. Upon seeing this, he reached out his hand to the side and used the poisonous mist, summoning the dagger he had obtained earlier in the secret realm. While he and Little Nine were staring at the giant spiders, he told her that it was time to enjoy a good meal. Both of them started staring at the giant spiders with a killer look, and he asked her if she was ready, to which she responded without hesitation that she was. Jiang activated Little Nine's poisonous mist, gained momentum, and in the blink of an eye, attacked the spiders using his dagger, cutting their bodies into pieces and infecting them with the poisonous mist in the process. As they advanced, their levels also increased rapidly. If they kept fighting monsters on the way back, they could at least level up 2 more times. In a matter of seconds, the monsters began to die. Those who had not received a mortal wound died due to the poisonous mist, which started corroding their bodies. In the blink of an eye, all the monsters died, forming a pile of corpses. Jiang approached and asked Little Nine to devour the remains of all these monsters. She became quite happy, extended her hands to the sides, and thanked him. At that moment, she started looking to one side and informed him that something big, powerful, and delicious was approaching. Upon hearing this, he also turned his head to the side, and upon seeing that Little Nine was quite excited, it didn't take him long to realize that what was approaching was the boss. Jiang turned his head in the direction from which the boss was approaching, extended his hand, and with a murderous look, used the poisonous mist and gave Little Nine the order to attack. The boss began to approach them and its shadow started becoming visible through the fog. Upon seeing this, Little Nine did not disobey the order and attacked the boss. Several seconds later, it began screaming in pain. Upon seeing that the boss had a woman's voice, Jiang turned his head towards it and became somewhat confused. It turns out that Little Nine had made a mistake, as the one approaching them was a woman and not the boss. Due to Jiang's attack, part of the woman's clothing ripped, and within seconds she fell backwards onto the ground unconscious. As he stood there observing her, he began to wonder what kind of magical creature this was. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.